All right, I've got to make a Candace response video to this Wednesday, January 13, I think it is. Is it the 13 or is it the 14th? The 14th. It's a great day. Silver got above $92, and I sold a decent fraction of my silver and bought some ammo and a bunch of chicken pellets. Anyways, yeah, the Candace response video. So, the last video I put out, it was a post about a response to a Feynman video. I don't know, probably saying it wrong. Um, Referencing time going backwards and quantum mechanics and relativity and such, which is all up my alley. Here's a book. Here's a book that everyone who has interest in such a thing should read. It's called The Tao of Quantum Mechanics, I think it is called. So it's from a person who's like at the forefront of quantum mechanics. And then they realize once they like go to the extreme of their science cult that everything is different than what they of everything that they thought that science was. Every quantum mechanics like turns it all upside down, and then they get into like Taoism and spirituality, and then they have the scientific basis to understand these other concepts, like these Hindu concepts. Okay, so this last episode of Candace, she goes deep. She gets into looking glass technology, and also Project Camelot, and so this was something that I got into 2008 probably. Yeah, roughly. And I was kind of like watching these Project Camelot interviews with these whistleblowers like as they were coming out in real time. And there's so many rabbit holes there, and some of them are BS and some of them are legit. Um, but I also have direct experience with this looking glass tech um and she gets into this the 2012 and the Mandela effect and the collapsing. Okay, so like how can I feed this back in a relatable way? So like a multiverse, a holographic universe where there's many different collective there's like if you now is the only time that's real. But if you look into the future and you look into the past, you can see these reflections of all these other dimensions of reality. And so if you want to look into the future, you can, and this is the way that quantum mechanics works as well, that you get percentages of like how a thing will happen. So they can like sort of predict like maybe it'll be like 50% this outcome and maybe 25% that this outcome and 25% that outcome or something like that. But there's only certainty in the present moment, and yet science can never recognize the present moment because science is always in the past. Everything about science is the past. The accepted relativity relative to science has the idea of time in which it's measured linearly in a certain relative state as its frame of reference, which is a state removed from the present moment. Did that make sense? You're following me? So we're sort of barking up the same tree here, and so it's like you get there's like a barking, and then there's like an echo, and then it's like you got to get the sound all the way around the tree because they're like the tree of and then there's only so far we can go so that we don't like lose. What's a good analogy? No, keep going. So what anyways, I am impelled. I'm impelled. I'm induced. Am I induced or am I impelled? I don't know. Let's talk about those. Induction versus I don't even know the difference. But if you want to understand things, listening to Feynman is great. And I got into him also over a decade ago. And so there's like the cat catches my tongue. There's things I want to say, and I can't say things yet. And so I can say that the looking glass technology is no more. So it's been disabled. You're welcome. And so to explain reality in the present, so there's these organizations, like, so think of like a corporation or company is an organization, and they have like information of that company. So let's like give an example of, say, like the Dutch East Indies Company. So a great book on this subject is the book Shogun. And if you don't want to read the book, you can watch the series on Hulu. And if you don't want to pay for Hulu, you can get a free trial. And that's what I did. And then I just got the free trial long enough to watch the series, even though I had already read the book. But I wanted to watch the series, and they did a good job with the series. But I mean, if you really want to understand like the analogy, you'd have to read the book. And it's by this author, Clavell, James Clavell. So I've been reading a number of his books, and so the first one, Shogun, it's in like the Dutch East Indies Company, and it so what's the analogy? Right, so the company, and you can make a similar analogy for the Catholic Church, but I'll just start with the Dutch East Indies Company. So like at one time they had the only information about how to get to Japan, and and they're like aligned with the Catholic Church, and so they have a monopoly on all the trade to Japan, and also basically like the Philippines, the Spice Islands, and sort of China. So by having a monopoly on the trade routes, they get all of this money, and from the money they can get power. And then part of the story of Shogun is that this English pilot, and the role of the pilot on the ship is more important than the captain of the ship. So the captain is lost at sea without the pilot. If the captain dies, you can replace the captain with, there's like a hierarchy of people on the ship. You can replace the captain with like the second in command or the third officer or whatever, but you can't replace the pilot, because the pilot is the one who can orient themselves relative to the stars, and who has the information, sometimes encoded, relative to how to navigate the oceans. Because, so for example, the English pilot that basically gets to Japan, which this whole story is about, of how they break the monopoly of the Dutch Indies Company, they end up coming from from around South America, and then they part of it is like they bribe some other pilots from the. Okay, I had to switch phones. This one has more storage on the video. So in the story, right, so they bribe some pilot that has the information within like the Portuguese or the I don't know, the Dutch or the Portuguese or the some pilot. So they get the information of the Straits of Magellan, and then within that pilot book they had information about the latitude of Japan. So then and the Straits of Magellan was like a monopoly. So how this information is monopolized by these complex companies is kind of the point. So you have like this big trading company, which is more powerful than the crowns, than the nations of the time, and is actually kind of more powerful, or it's kind of on the level with the church, but like the information is the power, is the means to the wealth, and then they occlude the information and keep it within their company so as to further their agenda. And what was this in relation to? And I'm going to tie this into this next Vernor Vinge book as well. So Vernor Vinge is like he's into something like way beyond. So these Clavell books, it's like insight into the past, and Vernor Vinge is like insight into the future. And so one of them roots you into reality, and then the other one kind of like expands your mind into like greater reality, like an hourglass. So I was making the analogy about the information and how, oh, because I'm trying to explain like the way that the world is now. So you have, and like the power ends up kind of coagulating, coalescing, working together for, or and also kind of competing and centralizing, and so that's why these occult organizations end up in these positions of power, and then you get the siloing effect where, so like for example, like if you have like Standard Oil against some small competitor, Standard Oil has a lot more information, and they have more money, and they have more power, so they can outcompete the other one, and they have all these connections with credit and then the banks, and then they can just buy up all the other ones and monopolize the oil interest. And then you have a similar thing like with banks and these tricks that banks do to just make money out of nothing, or just currency, debt, credit, because now they like, and then we're getting into silver. So like silver and gold are money, but the whole banking system is built upon, it's like a financial pyramid scheme built off of money. It's an inverse pyramid where gold and silver are at like the inverse point, and then you have this inverse pyramid built up on it. So it's this unstable thing that can tip over if there's if there's flows in that gold and silver, which is what we're experiencing now, as the dollar is going into its hyperinflation phase, and the gold and silver has all been kind of stolen out of that economic system, and it's been compartmentalized. And then the centralized power aspect of how these trends work over time is that they like a parasite, they suck all the wealth out of the host, and then and then kind of like make it self-destruct, and then they jump ship to the next kind of host for that banking parasite class, because everywhere has banks. And in the second James Clavell book about Japan, it's like the third in the series, which is Guy Jin. The second one goes to like mostly be about China, and the third one goes back to Japan. But it kind of gets into how how like the indigenous banking system within Japan ends up dominating Japan, like in like a century or two after Toranaga unites it under the shogunate. Or maybe, or so that's like the character name for Tokugawa. And but then they essentially, so they have less sort of knowledge, and then so they come into contact with the global banking system, and like the stock market aspect that they've set up in London, which was like a new sort of thing. And so that they've like dominated the wealth in the local place of Japan, but then they're ready to kind of like jump ship in a way and send the capital out of Japan into the global banking system in order to get a stake into it. So it's like conglomerating kind of. And but like those the like that class of people was like despised by the samurai class and all the people of Japan, and yet that banking merchant class in Japan finds the commonality with the banking merchant class of the British at that time, who had then become kind of the dominant sea-based power of the maritime empire. So circling that back to the current reality, so this technology, this looking glass technology, which in so in a way, so when you have astronomy, they say they're looking back in time. They say they look back to the point of the Big Bang. They say if they look back far enough, they can look to the start. So they're like looking back in time, and in space, there's not part of the idea of a looking glass technology. And we could also get into kind of these very sci-fi, and kind of another good movie on the subject, or that kind of references the subject, is Interstellar. It's kind of like a kids movie, but it gets onto the subject. But the idea that as you're looking out into space, you're looking back in time, and if you can focus on kind of like the event horizon of a mass that's great enough to bend light, like a black hole, and you look at the event horizon on that, so that it bends back, and you're looking back at yourself, then you're looking back at yourself in time. So you would be looking back at like the Earth. However, like if the black hole was like 1,000 light years away, you could be looking back like 2,000 years into the past or something. But if the looking glass technology would be akin to something that would be going sort of faster than the speed of light. So you would be looking into the future, or it would be receiving light from that future relativity. But um, so there's a certain degree of benefit that could be had from such a technology. Like if you can see probabilities, like a higher probability of such a thing. And so they really get into this in the Interstellar movie. So that's another good reference point, and that would be recommended. And it's probably George Clooney's best role, although I really liked him in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, and I don't really know all of his roles, and generally I don't agree with a lot of his stuff, but I really like that movie. He's actually like the conspiracy theory go against the grain person in the Interstellar movie, and so he's got a great character in that, kind of like Gene Hackman in Enemy of the State, um, but way more sort of techie. So he's in this alternate dimension where they had used the world's fairs to kind of like talent harvest the most talented people, and then they basically are like in another dimension where they've unlocked all of this potential, which could be analogous to kind of like the dream realm, but also the aspect of like traveling in between dimensions. So there's kind of like a parallel there, but basically they have this sort of like doomsday type machine in that show, and it's like a spherical thing, and I just got something to do with the moon being a parallel, but that's not in the movie. That just came from me. So it's like a future predicting thing, and then it predicts like an Armageddon thing at like 2012, and then as you get closer to the Armageddon, it's like sure that there's an Armageddon, but then once you get to the Armageddon point, then everything goes static. But then when you have like one girl who goes in and like, and then once they create the doomsday machine and it predicts the future and it predicts like the Armageddon thing, then all this society goes to hell because there's no more faith and hope in the future, because there's like an end point, and then it's like hopeless. So like what's the point? And so this whole like realm that was all advanced goes all like to decay, and then the people come out of that realm, and then they come back into the normal realm, and they're just living for the moment because they think that there's nothing beyond the moment. And it's like the corruption kind of like flows, it becomes corrupted, and then like the corruption kind of flows back. And then there's this whole kind of thing where so Candace gets in this in the last episode, and I'm just so for it, because everything she got into, I was like laughing the whole time, because I know that for probably like, I don't know what percentage of the audience who views that it's like new for, but for me, like I like everything of that was like repeating things that I had gotten into like over a decade ago, and it was just great to see all of that like mainstream from the perspective of Candace, and she's just like diving in, and I just love it. But one of the aspects she gets into in the show, and is also in the Interstellar movie, is where, and Stargate is like, I don't know where that just came from, but it's just like assaulting me, Stargate. But it's a similar type idea where, no, stay focused. Oh, so no, I'm gonna go on another tangent, because on my another thing I talk about, another Vernor Vinge thing, where the mind virus that the emergence instill is called focus, but it's not. But it's in the same way that like an emergency is like a fitting thing in a certain situation. It's like, oh my gosh, there's an emergency, and if there's like a hurricane and then there's a state of emergency, that's like a realistic thing. To declare an emergency after there's a real emergency, that's a good thing. But when you have a nation in a state of like 40 different emergencies, which the US, I think there's between like 20 and 40 states of emergency that give various parts of the government emergency powers to transcend the Constitution, and there's only more emergencies, and the emergencies never go away. That is the emergence. So the feds would be the emergence, the people who organize the eternal state of emergency that validates their state of power. So the focus of the mind virus, when people become focused, it's like they become like humanoid computers, where they no longer have their free will or their spirit. All they're focused on is like a person in a career. So like if you think about how like feminism has this idea of feminism, which is really an attack against women, drives women into the idea of having a profession, and then they become focused on their profession, and then while they're getting into like their profession and thinking that's the most important thing, the most important things are their youth and their magical ability to create new life and form families, which is like the most incredible thing that any life form can do, is going by the wayside. And then, like, at what point in your career path is there ever any kind of, like, so you get to you're 40 years old in your career, and like, what good has that done you? It's like, oh well, I'm independent and I have an income. It's like, well, what, you can't have like really kids, or like you've lost all of your best eggs while you're working for this debt-based currency, which is completely meaningless. It's like they got a mind virus. They became focused on an idea, which is serving the emergence. um, so that's how the emergents use this mind virus. And once the people have been infected with the mind virus, they're termed as having been focused. So it's not like if I use the word focus, like that verb is like a good thing. It's like focus so that you can orient your energy onto the thing that you're trying to get to. But in the emergence reference, being focused is a completely different thing than focus. Just like the emergence being a regime that organizes emergencies to further their own power and agenda is different than just there being an emergency. And the idea of the emergence being the people behind, like, the regency of the emergency, like the emergency is their form of government, basically. So I'm just clarifying a little aspect of language, that so that it's not lost in translation, because obviously focus is a good thing, but to be focused by the mind virus in the Vernor Vinge story is something that very few are able to resist. Pham Nguyen, the hero of the story, he is resistant to it, and a certain percentage of the population are resistant to it. But for the ones who aren't resistant to it, they become very much like computers, like humanized computers, where they just focus on their career path and they let everything else go. Kind of like a kid who dies from playing a video game because they forget to eat, and they like wither away because they've been so focused on the video game. It's like that's the thing for like the emergence in like different professional classes. So the slave masters, who are the like neocons, but the heads of the emergency, or of the emergence, they basically have all of the people are almost just about all the people except for the people at the top are basically like roboticized humans, which gets into the Matrix thing. It's like they're basically, each one is in like a little pod, and they're focused on serve like a career path that is serving the greater whole, kind of like a hive type thing, except the people at the top aren't intelligent. They're just the most ruthless, essentially. So yeah, where am I going from here? It's just this is for a very select audience that this is for, and obviously I don't have a big audience, but anyways, I'm going to tie it into the current Vernor Vinge book I'm reading, which is Rainbow's End. So this book is talking about advanced technology. So that whole storyline I was just telling you about, the emergence, there's Vernor Vinge has a trilogy of books. There's like the first one, and then there's like one that comes after, and then there's like a prequel. So you really want to, the prequel is like the third one in the book, and even though it comes kind of like before the other ones, but that's the one that has the whole emergence thing. So to get to that whole storyline, you'd have to read that whole trilogy of the Vernor Vinge books. The current Vernor Vinge book I'm reading is Rainbow's End, and this is getting into, so the theme of Vernor Vinge's books, he's like a free market person, a libertarian person, but he's also focused on like high technology and singularity stuff. And so the first trilogy, it has like different species in it, and also this whole idea of like realms of the universe, like if, or of the galaxy. Like if you're in the inner realm of the galaxy, like time and technology work in a certain way, and then there's like a middle realm, and then if you're like in the outer realms, It's a, I can't summarize it very well right now, but it's fascinating and intuitive, and highly recommended. This one has nothing about aliens, but it's kind of like, I think, one of his earlier ones, and it's just kind of writing about technological progress that one might think would be in the next several decades, but it's also like it could also be now because of the way that technology is occluded, essentially. And so a big aspect of it is with these like contact lenses, and then also kind of like brain chips, and then people being able to communicate, and basically how it becomes, so there's this whole thing of, I think it was maybe Peter Thiel being like, we don't just want trans people, that's only the beginning, we want transhumanism, we want to go so much further than just trans people, we want to change everything about humanity. And this is somewhat of a view into that in technological aspects, and like the positives and the negatives, and you could see it as like a point in between here in the Matrix, kind of, where like in the Matrix they can just like load up um, a program, so that you would instantly learn like kung fu or how to fly a helicopter or whatever, just by like loading it up. And so then there's also the aspect of these different dimensions. So not in the Vernor Vinge book, but in the Matrix things, you have the different dimensions. So there's the dimension of reality, where is the Matrix, and then there's the dimension of reality, which is the people outside the Matrix who are in, I guess, sort of like a fallen world that the machines have taken over, basically, and then they have to go like into the sort of the core of the world, because the machines have sort of taken over the surface of the world. You could relate that with the Vernor Vinge trilogy, where there's kind of this singularity type event that becomes kind of like a similar to the Matrix type thing, where it's like this machine type control singularity thing is like taking over kind of the outer realms of the galaxy, but it can't get to the inner realms, because it's basically what it gets into, like the stars and the galaxy itself is its own form of consciousness, and it has its own kind of immunity. And the blight that they call it in that trilogy, which is mostly the first book of the trilogy, though it carries on to the other ones, or at least the second one. The blight is kind of like this singularity kind of thing that like hijacks the people, because it's like an advanced computational thing, and so then that could be kind of related with the focus in the third book. But anyways, the aspect of it being the different dimensions was the parallel. So, and then something about Shiva. So the Hindu culture is one of the oldest cultures that, I guess, survived the last kind of destruction cycle, where their history is going back like 30-40,000 years, and they have these long-term cycles. And so the idea of Shiva is not a negative thing. You can turn anything into a negative. But in the Hindu thing, there's Krishna, which is like Christ. And if you get into the Marcion stuff, the whole idea of Jesus having an immaculate birth is just taken from Hinduism and is just regurgitated from Krishna. And isn't in the original story. The original story of the first gospel is coming from Paul, and Luke is Paul's kind of like acolyte or disciple. And Paul composes the or is kind of the source of the first gospel, which Marcion is composing, to have the first, what we would call now the New Testament. But really, that's just the Christian Bible, and there is no Old Testament in the Christian Bible. That's a different religion, one with two masters, but the Christian religion itself just has. Anyways, I'll try not to get into that. In the Hindu aspect, they have three deities. So there's Krishna, and then there's Indra, and then there's Shiva. So Krishna is the creative force, Indra is the sustaining force, and Shiva is the destructive force. All three are sort of gender neutral, but all three are essential in kind of like a almost like a breath phase. So you have like an in breath, and then you have like the medium time where things are sort of sustained, or you have like a growing and it advancing, and then you have kind of like a stable state, and then you have a decaying kind of cycle. And then so like when you breathe out, you instantly, when you finish your exhale, that would be analogous to like Shiva, you're exhaling, and then when you inhale is the start of the new cycle. And then there's like a pause in between, or there can be, and you can do work and breath work, and I even saw something recently saying like yoga is some like demonic thing or something. I don't remember where I saw that, but just breath. Where yoga, I think, is really just breath. I think that's like the definition of yoga or something like that, or one part of yoga. Anyways, so this is really all over the place, but that's how it's meant to be. Um, I've got a short that's way more simple, talking about something much more practical and what you can do with $100 to instantly turn it into $143. Imagine if there was just a magic trick that you could turn $100 into $143 right now. Would you do it? So value is an important thing to understand. To judgments of value, how to value things. Our value system can be based on religion. Religion is a form of value system, or it could be based on currency. So you can value things based off of what is the prices of things. So the free market results in a value system relative to prices. And yet the currency system which prevails is not a result of the free market, but is the result of, well, in a way it is, but it's like over time, naturally in the free market, power coalesces into something that corrupts the free market. And this gets into the theme that I was talking about recently about the idea of revolutionary versus counter-revolutionary, which is the whole thing about like Shiva and also the swastika. The swastika is just a symbol that is of revolution or counter-revolution. I don't know which way. One of the ways of spinning is natural, and one of the ways of spinning is unnatural. But that's only relative to the way in which we experience time. And time can be experienced in the inverse way. And in some ways, you could say that the way that we experience time, say it's a clockwise spin, and perhaps that's more favoring the male energy, and perhaps the counterclockwise spin is more favoring the female energy. And so the whole time we're living, we are basically, we're aging and we're moving towards death. And the only way that you can get the opposite time happening is when a new life is born. When a new life is born, time is going the opposite way. And that's why like a pregnant woman has a certain energy to them of like joy and radiance, and why babies have that energy, and it affects all the creatures around them. Like I had an old hen who she had stopped laying eggs for like 2 years, and she was near death. But when I put her with a whole bunch of chicks, she had a new energy to her, and she started laying eggs again, even though she was an old hen who had stopped laying eggs, because the energy of all the chicks that surrounded her, she was affected by them. And that's one of the reasons it's important to have the elderly people valued by society and integrated in the child rearing process, because they can impart wisdom to the infants that isn't even a rational form of wisdom, but is like a conscious, but like a spiritual form of wisdom almost like you could say, like, energy feeding or spiritual. Yeah, we'll keep it at that. Because some people have a very negative perspective of the whole idea of spirits, and the Catholic Church will say, "Oh, they're all demons." Um, and I don't have a whole lot of good things to say about the Catholic Church, but also I think that there are positive things, and whenever you have these kind of big centralized things, the centralized power structures, it's oftentimes that the centralized power structure, what it does as a whole, and and the people in the centralized positions of power are kind of very corrupted and doing bad things. But there can be all sorts of positive currents and eddies going along with the thing. Like the Catholic Church, they have so many different orders. Like the Knights Templar was an order of the Catholic Church, and then they have, like, I don't know. There's lots of orders. I don't know about them all, but I'm sure. I'm not. I like wanted to make reference to a person that I think I'm connecting with, but I'm not gonna call out his name. But it's all relative to the things, and you know if you know. Anyways, yeah. Is there anything else I want to talk about here? I touched on a whole bunch of different things. I reflected back everything that I received, and in a way that might be somewhat like echo of the bark around the tree. Whoa, 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 barking up the same tree. You got like dogs. You think that's like barking up the tree, like dogs barking on the tree. But what is the tree made up of but the bark of the tree? So you like the wood, like you think of all the whole tree, like the the bark is for them usually, and there's different kinds of trees. Some trees, if you ring around the bark, the tree will die. Other trees, if you ring around the bark, the tree will still live, depending upon the function of the bark on the tree, whether like the nutrient in the water is moving up the bark or whether it's moving up the middle of the tree. And that's a lesson I learned in the last year, where apple trees, even if you ring around the tree, and other fruit trees, you can ring around them, take the bark off, and the tree will still live and it'll recover. But there's other trees like sumac, which is like less of a tree and more of like but there's lots of other trees, maybe like aspen type trees also. But if you ring around them, the whole tree will die. Anyways, I was just talking about, like, when I was the idea of like barking up the same tree. I was thinking of like two dogs like barking like on different sides of the tree, and then kind of like you get better awareness of like the tree if you got two dogs and they're barking. But then I was like, whoa, think of like the sound of like the bark, but then like the bark of the tree. And then if you got two dogs on either side of the tree and they're both barking up the tree, then you can get bark on all around the tree. And then the life is all around the tree. And obviously there's like different analogies. There's the tree of life, but then there's like the tree of knowledge, and some of the things are, it's like, okay, to have some fruit and other fruit, and it's gonna be like a whole journey of life and death and learning before you're gonna get out of that whole cycle of that fruit of that tree. And then there's like the poison fruit, and you don't want to have the poison fruit, but obviously we know what the good tree is, and you don't want to be eating from the rotten fruit. And the first tweet I ever made, I'm pretty sure the first tweet I ever made on Twitter was to the Pope Francis, I think. And I was telling him, I was correcting him on the dress code. I was like, you better get those cardinals wearing orange, or otherwise you're going to be in trouble, because if you've got these like viperous creatures in black and red around you and you're at the center, then, and you think you're wearing white, then you're inverse signaling. That's like the basically the Antichrist that pretends to be in all white, and pretends to represent Christ, when in fact they represent a power organism that's basically parasiting all of the energy of the planet. And if you look at the guy who came before Francis, like, that was kind of him, and he got conquered, and so they had to replace him with somebody or he actually had to step down. I think he probably lost it. His body might have still been alive, but anyways, he's the only pope to ever really step down, I guess, or maybe in like 1,000 years or something. Anyways, so Francis, he changed. He had to, eventually, after many years, the cardinals were wearing a different color, and maybe it was just for some sort of celebration of a certain time of year. But when I saw a picture of all of the cardinals wearing orange, it made me very happy, and I was pleased with him. Though I think the other people who wanted him to be in the former role were less pleased, perhaps. It's a tough position to be in the center of a very powerful organization, and that's evolved in a certain way where all the people who are moving up the hierarchy are basically the most kind of corrupt and ambitious, and it's all aligned with kind of Rome and whatnot, which if you got to look at the seed of anything. This channel is OG Foundation, and I kind of think of it as like off grid, but also original. So you want to look at where do the things start, the seeds which start the things. So to understand what Rome is, you have to look at the seed of how Rome started. So Rome started with a bunch of mercenaries who self-associated as being wolves, predatory wolves from the planet of Venus, and they do false flag, false ceremonies, and then slaughter all of the good people who think that they're going to be good neighbors, and then they kidnap their women and enslave them. That's what Rome is from its seed, and as it grows, that's the culture of Rome from the beginning to now. So now you just have a really big thing of Rome, and it's the exact same thing. And the Catholic Church, so the church, if Christianity, the seed, you could put it back to John or Jesus, because John is Jesus's initiator. So say it starts with John or Jesus, whatever one you want to say, but that being like the seed, then you have to like, there's rot there, like there will be like rotten trees that are grafted upon to the good tree that will bear like rotten fruit and seem like it's from the original thing, even though it's just been grafted on and it's not like the original seed. So the anyways, that's getting into the Catholic Church versus what Marcion represented, the Marcionites, who are like the good tree, and then the followers of Peter. Peter just wanted to create a cult, and it was all about ego, and that's what Satan is. That's what Saturnian worship is. It's all about the ego, whereas Christ is all about being selfless. And so Peter creates a cult trying to imitate what Jesus was doing, which was the opposite of that. And the whole time, a lot of his sermons, it's like he is referencing Peter as like, he's like, if you read the very first Bible, which is coming from Paul, and then which is composed by Marcion, all of the parables become so clearly obvious. Like, it didn't make sense before, but in many instances, Jesus is using no. Jesus calls Peter Satan, his adversary, but he's just a little pebble. So he's not like he makes himself into Peter makes himself into the adversary of Jesus, because he's in the idea of a mentality of ego and a cult. So he's thinking like, once Jesus is gone, who's going to run this cult thing that we've got going here? And so he's all about like power and being in that central ego position, when Jesus is the opposite energy. So the seed of Peter, of that ego worship, of being the adversary of Jesus, that is what the Catholic Church is grown out of, is all out of Peter. Whereas the Marcionites, the Marcion Church, is all out of kind of following Paul after Jesus. And then so Paul and Peter have this kind of thing, and then there's a so the anyways yep, it's gonna end there. This is really probably just meant for one person, most likely. And then most of the other people who will see this will be like, wow. Wow. But that's how it's meant to be. And who is it, the Buddha, maybe Buddha, gives like a whole speech, or he describes a thing. And anyways, there's a parable that I like want to give you, but I can't really give you the parable. But it has to do with kind of like a hierarchy. So like we're like the Truth Mountain. So if we're talking about Truth Mountain here, if you're at the top of Truth Mountain, you can relate with the people who are like right around you. But if you try to relate with the people at the bottom of the Truth Mountain, you're not going to be very relatable. And then if you try to relate with the people in like the valley beyond the base of the mountain, not only are you not relatable, but it's like it's a negative thing kind of. It's like there's like a derisive kind of quality to it, where an analogy would be how the fool can be a positive or a negative. The jester can be a positive or negative. They can be the life of the court, the most kind of sort of appreciated and sort of celebrated person in the court, or they can be the most derided person and despised person in the court. Like you can play your ace high or low, and your deck of cards is not much difference from the tarot. Or even getting into the zodiac. So we're just having symbols for a spectrum, just like Jesus has his 13 disciples. They say it's 12 because they don't want to count the woman who ends up most aligned with him, and therefore is erased from the history of the cult of the adversary. And so they let the cult of the adversary, as well as the cult which led to the crucifixion of Christ, they let them run with the lie, even though they are aware of the truth. And you get the same theme in the Wheel of Time series, where the protagonist has to hide the fact that he survives the confrontation with the centralized forces of evil, because that's how the cycle comes full circle. So I'll go there. The Jesus and the disciples who are aligned with him, and some of the Romans, had to hide the fact that he didn't die on the cross, and they had to let those who wanted him dead, they had to let that lie live, that he was killed, because then those who believe the lie have to then believe that he was then resurrected. So it's like kind of like a jujitsu move, where both the supporters and the deriders end up kind of championing the same person, even though they have different beliefs about it. But the people who supported the person truly don't carry on with the cult. They carry on with a teaching of wisdom relative to Christ, which is accessible to all. And the cult carries on celebrating a person who spoke only truth, and they use that person as the glue which binds the cult as it goes forward in time. So Candace was making some like analogies about how Charlie Kirk had to be removed for the cult of Turning Point to be able to use his memory to support their Zionism, essentially, even though the man himself was turning against that. And there are obviously parallels there, and I guess a lot of people would see it. The more you're bought into this religion cult, the more you would think it's like blasphemy to say that Jesus didn't come from a virgin birth, or he didn't die on the cross. Apparently Muslims don't even think he died on the cross. And what does that say about their religion if that's the truth? But yeah, being crucified for a couple hours on a cross is not a fatal thing. They had to create the lie that he was then stabbed to satisfy those who wanted him killed, when in fact a good Jew petitioned the Roman leader in order to have him taken down from the cross and then put him into that guy's tomb on a Saturday, when everyone else, because of the reigning cult of the time, they all stayed inside on Saturday. And so Jesus had a whole day to basically recover from having nails driven through his feet and his hands, and then get on the road and make his way to then have an interaction with some other disciples or whatever. So it's important to let and like, I don't know, some people would say it's important for kids to believe in Santa, and then some other people would say it's important that we make their kids believe in Santa Claus so that they believe in this magical realm and they're disassociated with reality, and then they always have this magical thinking, and then it's kind of like a mental vaccine, in a sense that you're pre-injecting someone with a mental dis-ease so that they're not attuned to reality, so that when they finally wake up to the fact that Santa Claus isn't real, then they also have to come to terms with the fact that their most trusted people, their parents, have lied to them for their entire childhood. And then this lie is perpetuated all the time, and that they're expected to go along with this lie, and that this culture has part of it that everyone is supposed to lie to each other and lie to all the kids because, oh, it's just a nice thought, as opposed to just being like, yeah, it's winter time and the days are the shortest and the solstice has come, and now we're going to have a celebration and feasts and give each other presents, and also it's a good season for like mushrooms, which is what Santa Claus comes from, in the season of winter when all of the life has gone subterranean, and it's the fungal mycorrhizal networks underground, which are the unseen forest that one can access through various natural medicines. And so one of my favorite things about Candace is that she never reverts to the cult worship of Jesus, but she puts truth on high and equates Christ with truth, as opposed to worshiping a person. So I can't even tell you how much of a pet peeve it is when people preach, or they think they're doing this religious positive, and Russell Brand is doing this constantly, and he's become so cringe that it's like I can't listen to him for any extended period of time, because his understanding, he just applies like Hollywood and stardom to Jesus, and then like worships Jesus like a Hollywood star or something, and it's just so cringe. Because that's the complete opposite of the message. And that's what Peter would constantly be trying to do. Peter would constantly be wanting to worship Jesus like a cult leader, and Jesus would always be like checking him, like, no, I'm not the Son of God, I am the Son of Man, just like you. And then it's like, as soon as he's dead, it's like, he's not the Son of Man, he's the son of a god. He, like, his mother was a virgin. He came from a god, and we need him to have come from a god, and we need him to be magical, and we need him to walk on water, and we need him to resurrect from the dead, because that's what our whole cult is based off of. And we need all these people to believe in this cult, because that's how we're going to control them. And then we need to use this cult to infiltrate the Romans, who have conquered our whole culture. And then through this religion, brainwashing, and the priestly class, which is how that whole cult maintained its power in the first place over their own people, and making their own people sacrifice themselves. And if they're going to sacrifice their own children, that's how they're going to maintain complete power over that culture of people. for eternity because they're chosen, and then they also sacrifice themselves because they're chosen, and because they're chosen and because they're willing to sacrifice themselves, they're like in this cult that is always going to be like the in group, and the other people aren't chosen, the other people don't sacrifice and do these like infant mutilation rituals, and therefore they're in the out group, and that's how we're going to stay separate from the rest and have this countercultural domination clique take over the world. So that's the end of this little vlog, and hopefully it reaches the top G, and or it might not even. I might be misassociating, but it doesn't really matter because it's just what I have to do, and so I do what I have to do and carry on. And I'll have a short coming out soon about how you can turn $100 into $143 overnight, and more than that, and more. And Jefferson was great. Next to Stark, he was like the greatest founding father. So yeah, that'll be coming, and I'll be talking about that because I'm obsessed with that. And we're in this huge fourth turning in this hyperinflationary thing, and the whole thing is that there's nothing to fear. Oh, this is what I wanted to get to in the beginning because I wanted to give the grand picture of everything and the looking glass falling apart and this occult thing. And so it's like they're all stirred up. They're not in the position. They realize that their power is not supreme, and they have a limited realm in which they can play their game. So they can't attack the truth bearers. They need to spread the lie. Their weapon is the lie. Their weapon is fear. Their weapon, their tool. And their enemy are those who bear the truth. So those who bear the truth become untouchable to we'll call them the Satanists, whose weapons and tools are lies and fear. So they have no power against the person who is fearless and who is in the truth. And as soon as the person who, and so that's the orientation of reality. So the truth is the Most High. If you rest in truth, though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, there is nothing to fear because the truth is with you. And the only thing to fear is the potential. Well, no, not even. There's nothing to fear, but it's like the weapon that is used against. They'll try to make you afraid. They'll try to feed you lies, and if they can get you afraid, then they've beaten you. If they can get you to accept the lie, then they beat you. But if they can't do either, they'll run away from you. And the more that the people are waking up to truth, the more frantic these occult Satanists become, and the more they ramp up their lies, and because they want to get everyone else, because they lead from behind, so they want to rally up everyone else, they want to get everyone frenzied, they want to stir everything up, they want to do divide and conquer in every way possible. They want a mass formation psychosis where the whole mass is full of fear, and then they're going to want to herd that whole mass, and then from behind they're going to want to throw it at the people who are in the position of truth. But it doesn't matter. That's the funniest thing about everything, because they can because the masses are no more powerful than the ones who are trying to herd the masses to throw against their enemy, who they can't face in the first place. And so the orientation of the spiritual warfare, in which is the reality in which we exist, is that the only thing you need to do is be rooted in truth and be fearless. And this is why the Fool is the most powerful symbol in the tarot deck, because what a fool represents is someone who rejects knowledge and proceeds on faith. Because knowledge in and of itself can be like a stumbling block, can be like an adversary to faith. So the more knowledge you have, you always need to have an increasing amount of faith than the knowledge, because then otherwise you get stuck in a closed-minded perspective, and then also thinking that that the individual knows, and then that gets into that whole ego realm. that Saturnian satanic ego realm. So the way is of letting go of knowledge, and the truth is what remains. Oh, another shout out. The greatest teacher of all is, well, some would say Jesus, but my greatest teacher was Krishnamurti. I think his first name is Jiddu Krishnamurti. He's definitely my most influential teacher, and his whole thing is just about a way of getting to the truth, and it's always just by sitting with it and letting go of everything else, which is basically the practice. It's like the practice of meditation, and that's like the benefit of meditation, of letting everything go. And so yeah, so that's the way that we prevail, is by remaining truthful and being fearless, and then you can understand, and there are no enemies. There are none that can go against the truth. There are those who will fashion themselves as the enemy. So consider this. Jesus wasn't the enemy of Peter, but Peter fashioned himself as the adversary of Jesus. So Jesus called Peter Satan, or the Antichrist, or not. He didn't call him the Antichrist, but he called him adversary or Satan, depending on the translation. Antichrist becomes the center of the power that grows from the seed of Peter upon that pebble that Peter represents. So, which would be the position of the Pope. But I do think the last Pope went through a sort of a transformation. I can't speak on it too much, but I'm not in conflict with him, and I don't know anything about the current one. But point being that the truth has no enemies, but those who make themselves anti-Christ, they see the truth as their enemy. But they are not the enemy of truth. So, and I gave this analogy to someone else recently. Maybe they'll see this. So imagine you're in the household of a Satanist, someone that maybe by happenstance, or maybe they've been assigned as a controller to you, and it has resulted in you living in a state of reactionary fear and doubting your own connection to source, to divinity, whatever. That person sees you as an enemy, that satanic controller, and they have to control you. So you're simultaneously an enemy and a source of energy. And when you're in that relationship, that person is your enemy as well, because they are your overlord that doesn't have your best intent. But as soon as you become aware of that energetic sort of parasitism, the bond is broken, and even if the other person continues to see you as an enemy, you can transcend that problem, and then that person is no longer your enemy. You just see them as a parasitic type energy, so that the truth and the people, and like, so I have no enemies, and there are none who are against me. There are many who are doing things that I might not agree with, but there are none whom I hate, and there are none who are against me. There are those who might try to deride me, and then in that sense, I can be like a food source relative to them in a focal type sense. But that's not against me. That's just the way that they reflect the light that's coming from me. And then in another episode, Candace is talking about like the spiritual leader of Charlie and refracting light, and she must know that Charlie was a Mason. I assume he's a Mason. Trump called him a master Mason or master builder. One of the earliest quotes, Candace is talking about Turning Point as an architectural firm, is the words that she used. And so I question at times how much she is kind of twisting the truth, or how much she knows. But anyways, I'm just all I'm all there for it. There, it's like the last episode. I was like, yeah, she's kind of going off on like she's kind of losing it, and then this episode today, I was just so pleased by where she took it, and yeah, and maybe there's like one or two people who are going to watch this and find value in it, and maybe more, and then there'll probably be some other directors. But I'm gonna leave it there. It's been way long enough. So that's all. I gotta go take care of the goats and put wasabi away with the other chickens.